The true start. I'm not lying this time.
Just had a stroke. I know that because they know that I will do that. We're going to go for about 55 minutes-ish. Always add ish because it's kind of a little bit of a... We're going to hit there, but we're going to have a great conversation tonight with Ben and Ana. I'm looking forward to it. I know all of you are too because we've been talking to you. So
now, a little bit of rundown here. This is Ana Kasparian. I mean, they're going to introduce each other, but like the reason I'm talking about it beforehand is she is literally at a basically a what is it? It is a they'll say it. It's basically a place that's like pro business, pro business owner, pro upper class people who have already had wealth. So she's pretty much in the bullpen, so to speak, as she's in like a place where business people are. I can't remember the name of the thing. It's her area she's at.
Kind of start off. Let me ask you.
Chamber of Commerce. It's Chamber of Commerce. I'm just stupid and couldn't think of the word. Yeah, she's at a Chamber of Commerce somewhere that is like basically just a fucking vulture's pit for fucking rich people, rich conservative folks. So she's really an uphill battle already. So I got to give her credit for that. Either way, let's jump right in.
Ben, would you like to introduce Ana?
Sure. So this is Ana Kasparian. She is, first of all, big round of applause for Ana because this is a Chamber of Commerce meeting. Ana's quite famously Bernie Sanders supporter, so it takes a lot of guts to get up in front of a business audience, and she really deserves a lot of credit for that, for sure. She's the co-host of the immensely popular...
He admitted. He admitted.
On YouTube, it's also a podcast, and it's available pretty much everywhere. He admitted. And she's also the producer of that show, executive producer of that show.
Thank you.
Young Turks kick ass.
All right. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and everyone's been so hospitable and incredibly polite and nice, and I really appreciate that. Ben, I just found out, based on what Jean told me, suggested me to be part of this conversation. I really appreciate that.
Throw her to the vultures. Terrible.
The Daily Wire, incredibly well known, especially in the media space, the new media space specifically, but he's certainly made his rounds in traditional media as well. And he has really popularized a lot of conservative ideals, conservative beliefs that I think were getting a little played out by some of the old guard of conservatism. So, Ben is known for being sharp, being able to defend his viewpoints without engaging in personal attacks. So, looking forward to having this conversation.
That is true, I guess. I guess.
With everyone here. So, thank you for having me.
Well, we love civility, so thank you. So for those of you who looked at it, our topic is leading political voices of the next generation of leaders. So you're thought leaders within your individual, within your generation, a generation that's much younger than mine. What would you like the people of your generation to know moving forward? Ana, let's start with you.
Well, I think that my generation is certainly pretty passionate about changing things, certainly changing the way that they work and live. We're seeing that play out currently with the pandemic and the labor shortage that's taking place. And I'd like them to know that we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. We've seen strategies and solutions that have worked in the past. This country has gone through many terrible things in its history. It's a very short history, relative to other countries. And despite all of those awful things that have happened, things like the Great Depression, for instance, the country was still able to pull through. And I would suggest looking to history at the solutions that worked, specifically a strong labor movement, in order to, really rework the power dynamic that we're seeing right now in the workplace. I think a lot of the...
She's talking about empower the worker, give workers more, control over themselves, basically, and also to give them more, job security and this to feel welcome. Like, that's the problem with the workforce these days, is no one feels welcome at the job they're at. They get treated like shit. They get treated as a fucking pawn. And she's right.
Reasoning for not going back to the jobs that workers were previously working in prior to the pandemic has to do with the fact that, hey, we've been staying home during the lockdown. Now we realize that spending time with our family, having a little free time for ourselves, being able to go out outdoors and do recreational things. That's important to us. So they're reimagining what their lives could be like if they take a little bit of power back in the workplace. And I think that that's definitely possible. They just got to fight for it. They got to organize. They got to work together and not get distracted by manufactured culture wars that we see play out in the media every day.
Ben, how about the folks on your side?
So, I mean, I think that for folks on my side, I sort of have the same message for everybody on all sides, which is that the world did not begin spinning when you were born. And there's a great amount of wisdom, accumulated wisdom, that has built up over literally thousands of years, in the United States over hundreds of years, that is well worth going back to as a source of both inspiration and understanding of exactly why the system is supposed to work in a particular way. And that requires a certain understanding of human nature, of human beings, as both capable of amazing things, but also as inherently flawed and ambitious, and why you need a governmental system that is capable of checking ambition with ambition, checks and balances, subsidiarity, the belief in a federalist system that allows for experimentation on a local level without attempting to cram one-size-fits-all solutions on everybody from the federal level. But that begins with reading...
Oh, yes. Okay, I see. Yes.
Basic philosophies about how the United States works, because if it feels like the country is coming apart, and it really does feel like that more and more every day, that is because I think that there is a failure to agree on some of the central bases for the country. So we're either going to have to clarify where the disagreements are, or we're going to be in serious trouble as a country.
I love the answers because it leads directly into what I want to ask you about next. This is going to be the most obvious statement I'm going to make tonight. The last 18 months have seen significant turmoil, not only with COVID, but with our social, our cultural upheavals, as we've seen people, protesting some just horrible, egregious acts. As you noted, the future of work, how we work, all those things are out there for discussion. Trust in institutions, and trust or an understanding, as Ben said, of literally the basis of our society. I saw a great quote. I mean, we've had the 1619 Project, we've had the book called 1620, 1776 Commission, all of them designed to push back on that. I saw a great quote from a noted political scientist who said, "America is not a lie, but a disappointment because it is a hope." Would you agree that that's a good description, and would you also agree that the U.S.
I like that description to some degree.
An exceptional country? Ben,
myself.
I mean, I obviously believe that the United States is an exceptional country. I think that our history is filled with moments of glory. It's also filled with some terrible tragedy and some terrible evil. There's no question about any of that. To suggest that America is a disappointment is to suggest that utopia is a real place, or that whenever you say somebody's a disappointment, you have to say compared to what?
No, he doesn't like it. He don't like it. Oh, he don't like it. I thought it was a decent quote. I thought it was very well thought out. And here he is, just pooping on it, right?
What countries around the world stand for, or what they have provided to their citizens, or what they have provided to the globe, then by no means is America a disappointment. America is a tremendous
No, we're going to get a fucking ad.
Success story in world history.
What can you say? What can you do? What can you say? That was a good little dodge.
So there are parts of that I agree with, some parts that I disagree with. For the most part, I just want to note that the idea of America is an incredible idea. I think
right, it's an idea.
Has failed to live up to its ideals.
Right.
I think that there are certain things that are transpiring as we speak that
her earring isn't fucking.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh no. Checks and balances, but I think more often than
this
not,
is slightly
it's
off.
a system that is in fact rigged in favor of the powerful. I'll give you specific examples. In the beginning of the pandemic, there were lawmakers in the Senate who engaged in this minimalizing, just completely minimizing the severity of the pandemic, to the point where I actually didn't think that COVID was a serious threat to me, my health, my family's health. In fact, in February, I went on a cruise with my in-laws and had a great time and didn't think that COVID was going to be an issue. Then I find out, of course, a month later, everything starts shutting down. People I know get incredibly sick. And then news reports come out in regard to members of the Senate who had a classified briefing, closed-door briefing on the severity of COVID, and immediately turned around and started selling their stocks. They started buying tech stocks, realizing that people are likely to work home, so they might need to invest in technology.
Okay, I thought that was on my end. I think this is the feed error.
Make that possible. Basically, there's insider trading happening within the Senate. And I'm saying it out loud, and I'm saying it on a regular basis because that kind of activity, that type of behavior, first of all, is illegal for the average American, should not be illegal for members of the Senate. The fact that we have...
Oh, she got a cheer. That's pretty... I got to pause it. That's pretty telling that she got even a small applause out of the normal time of applause. You know, like you normally clap after someone's done talking no matter what. That was out of rhythm clapping, and that was in a place, like I said, a Chamber of Commerce, where it's very hard for her to garner any kind of... That was good. That's telling. That's good. She's getting somewhere.
Invested in businesses that they're deciding legislation on is unacceptable. So when you talk about the lack of trust in our institutions, I understand that lack of trust. And that lack of trust has led to the situation that we're experiencing today with COVID, where people don't believe in what the CDC is telling them, where people question
a lack of knowledge in science or belief in science. Both.
Because of the lies that have been told, because of the system being rigged against them, they just assume that they're being lied to. And now we find ourselves in this difficult position where we're trying to find solutions. We're trying to come together so we combat COVID effectively.
The Beatles had a song about that. Come together.
Families can thrive, but that's incredibly difficult to do when people don't trust in our institutions.
These feeds.
So
These feeds.
Evening, we had three of us had some
like the up close camera sucks.
The way that our culture is broken, the way that civility has broken down. Let me give you a couple of numbers that are actually pretty scary. 15% of Americans have terminated a friendship over political differences. The reality is 53% of the R's have a Democrat friend, only 32% of Democrats have a Republican friend. Granted, a lot of that is reported as being related to former President Trump. Kevin Drum, who I don't know, but is a liberal journalist with Mother Jones, said, quote, "If you hate culture wars, blame
who liberals." I don't know.
He wrote that in Washington Monthly. Is it fair to blame more liberals for the culture divide, or is it one that both sides have to take blame for?
What?
I think that liberals certainly engage in manufactured culture wars, and it's frustrating to see it. Full disclosure, I myself have engaged in it, and I think instead of being oblivious or delusional about it, it's important to acknowledge when you've made the mistakes, right?
Right.
And so the demonizing doesn't help. At the end of the day, we have to realize that we're all Americans. We all want the same thing. Fundamentally, we are the same. We might have different solutions, different ideas. Demonizing the other side doesn't help to accomplish any solutions. Again, we're seeing that play out in real time as we speak. I think that there's a market for the division, and that market is being exploited by our media. It's being exploited by politicians. And I mean, Facebook is in the news today. I think that Facebook, it makes money based on engagement, and people are engaged in the constant conflict. So it's important to be honest about what the real threats in society are. I think it's important to focus on why it is that, certain industries, including the media, engage in this culture of division. And we got to talk about how the incentives are in the wrong place. I mean, there are no incentives to engage in, friendly conversation or friendly debate. I hate that my chair keeps, and I'm like, I'm turning my back to people. Here, I'll just do this. I'll sit on the very edge. But, we got to be aware of why it is that people engage in the divisive rhetoric that they engage in. There's a profit motive behind it oftentimes. I see it play out in the media. It's really, really
I feel
hard
Anna, this chair is so uncomfortable. Right? That's why I'm fucking sitting weird myself. This chair sucks.
The country is right now, it's
so
shameful. Bad. We don't see each other as fellow Americans.
And that's with a pillow in the motherfucker on top of it.
Colleagues or workers in the workplace. Everyone has a political identity, and that's it. And that's not helpful. I think the division in the country is incredibly embarrassing, especially on a world stage. And we got to be more cognizant of that as we engage in political discussions.
That's pretty good. See, now that's the time.
I certainly agree with you.
See, that's one of those scheduled clap times where it's not impressive if you get claps there, because that's like everyone claps at the end of the spoken part. So
amount of what Anna is saying about the nature of sort of the world that we live in, where people feel as though they are going to be ostracized socially. They feel that they might be fired depending on their political point of view. They feel as though if they make comments openly, and this is true for pretty much everybody across the political aisle, actually, with the exception of people who consider themselves on the far left, According to a Cato study, basically every political subgroup in the United States feels uncomfortable speaking openly about what they believe, except if you're on the far left, because then you get to find people's old tweets and do that sort of stuff. But I'm not going to pretend that I think that the culture wars are irrelevant.
That was a stupid dig.
That was stupid. Are highly relevant, and not just relevant. I think that they may be indicative of sort of where the country is going, because the way that most people experience interactions with the government, particularly the federal government or with politics generally, is not always based on tax rates or the very minute internecine debates that we have over $3.5 trillion bills that nobody knows what's in, and then everybody just votes before they read the thing. A lot of the way that people engage in politics. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think that a lot of the ways that socially there's been.
She's like, I can tell you what it said. I can tell you what it says, Ben.
And it's driven a lot of reactionary resentment on the part of people.
Oh, Benny boy.
And I would suggest that a lot of the support for President Trump, for example, was driven by precisely that. It wasn't just about his economic program, which differed from sort of the traditional laissez-faire Republican economic program. A lot of it was about the idea that he was a culture warrior who was going to punish enemies and all of this. And so to pretend that the culture war either doesn't exist or that people are making it up in their imagination or that they are overestimating the impact of it on their life is to ignore how people are being treated in the spaces that they treat with every day, on Facebook, on Twitter, in the workplace. I mean, one of the reasons that my family and I left California is not just because of the living standard, although Florida is way better. It is also because we left a place where we felt as though our children were going to be socially ostracized for a place where we feel our children are not going to be socially ostracized, and that's a big thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, you actually brought up a few issues that I agree with. Number one issue is the constant policing of people's pasts, what they've said in the past. I think holding people to the current standards based on the current culture. If you're looking at tweets, for instance, from 2009, and you're judging that tweet based on what the current culture or the current standards are, it's a little ridiculous, right? So going around demonizing people based on their past statements, it shuts down a conversation. An
intelligent conversation, right?
About, oh, hey, look, society has actually progressed on this, and look at what was okay. I mean, you have late night hosts who were in blackface not too long ago, right? But the culture has changed. I think that, society as a whole, not everyone, but society as a whole has realized, oh, well, blackface has a pretty terrible history, and maybe it's not a good idea to dress like that as like a cute little Halloween costume.
Right.
But beside the point, I don't think that the culture wars are fake. I think the culture wars are taking place. The point that I'm trying to make is that oftentimes, whatever the culture war is of that moment, it is manufactured as a distraction. A perfect example will be, critical race theory, which is not taught in elementary schools. Critical race theory is a graduate level curriculum. And the fact that it's turned into some weird, we need to ban critical race theory in elementary schools, it's ridiculous and a massive distraction that I think is intentionally meant to be a distraction from what people are really feeling frustrated about.
This is right back to a previous thing I did about it was Dr. Rashad Ritchie debating Kevin Sorbo's wife Sam about critical race theory, and that's the same exact thing that he had to differentiate those two ideas for her, that critical race theory as it is a high level thing that's being taught in high level educational areas, like college level. They're not being taught to grade schoolers and young kids. Those things are just normal parts of history to keep kids informed on the well-rounded as close as they're gonna fucking be to an education, so they know that America isn't just fucking all pussy willows and rainbows and unicorns. Showing kids what racism is, that in itself is not critical race theory, and that's exactly what she's saying. They're conflating the issue, and she's nailed that point very concisely.
The precariousness of their lives, of their work lives, the fact that people feel overworked, that they have no control over the work that they're doing, that they feel alienated over the work that they're doing. These are very real issues, and I think that the fact that it's really largely been ignored by both the press and the very political leaders who were elected to represent them in the first place has led to the anger that we're seeing bubbling up both on the left and the right.
And I think you wanted to make a couple comments.
Yeah, I mean, this will be a very quick note. I obviously disagree with you about critical race theory and whether it is taught in the public schools. Critical race theory, which I studied in law school, it started off as a legal theory, but it has an element of praxis that was meant to be implemented, which is why it is taught in education schools as well, and why
in elementary.
Yeah, I was saying it's taught in schools, not elementary school, and that's exactly what she's like. What?
Yes, a very boiled down. I mean, Ibram X. Kendi is preaching a very boiled down version of critical race theory, and his book is assigned in elementary schools. I mean, the fact is that when you are
very boiled down, okay, critical race theory boiled down is not even critical fucking race theory. That is just what I said earlier. It's just the components. Like, okay, teaching kids that something is racist, or teaching kids what racism is, or teaching kids about race, period, that in itself is not critical race theory. That is just educating your kids about race. But he and people who argue against that are trying to conflate that is somehow teaching them critical race theory, when it's like he doesn't want to teach them about the mishaps and the misgivings of racial inequality in this country, which is actually really sickening and just disheartening, to say the least.
With regard to their race, and then explain to each other whether they are historically privileged or not in 4th or 5th grade. That's a very dumbed down version of critical race theory. There's sort of a game that gets played with regard to legal theories that end up being boiled down. Intersectionality is another great example of this. Kimberly Crenshaw writes a very intelligent law review article about intersectionality and how you can be a member of more than one minority group and be discriminated against in a variety of ways. And then that is used as the basis for a much broader move in American political life. And then as soon as you point that out, they say, well, that's not intersectionality, it's the original law review article. That's a bit of no true Scotsman games playing. And so I
what the fuck? What the fuck?
The governor of Virginia literally saying in open debate that it should not be parents.
This is when he really starts to fall off the rails, huh?
Education. I mean, that is a culture war issue that I think is of key importance to people who have kids, right?
The fuck are you talking about?
That's part of what leads to the lack of trust in our institutions.
Right.
I mean,
Thank
yes,
you.
As a parent, you get to make decisions about which school you want your kid to go to. If you're uncomfortable with the public school curriculum, you can take a look at private school options. If you don't want that, you can homeschool. But who gets to be if we're talking about parents making those decisions, who gets to be the arbiter of, which parent gets to be the arbiter of what gets taught in any particular public school?
Yeah,
I'm not really buying that they're learning.
Could you imagine if, like, every school district had, like, a Karen who dictated what was taught in their region, and, like, they, like, held domain or dominion over, like, what every other kids or whatever other parents' child's learning? Like, could you imagine that? Like, what if that parent doesn't agree? There's no way you're going to find an agreement for every one parent, like for every specific thing being taught in school. That's why you have a school board in general to help with things like this, like to make it like well-rounded. That's the whole point of education, is to be well-rounded and to teach. Don't hide things from kids. This is ridiculous. I mean, what she's saying is true, and it just highlights how ridiculous people arguing against this are. It's fucking weird.
About critical race theory, or even a boiled down for I'm positive that elementary schools are not learning about systemic racism, and even if they are, even if
they're
it's
not,
a boiled
but she's
down version of that, learning about systemic racism is important. I think that's an issue in this country.
Maybe like a high school, like junior high school level, maybe. I don't know.
The division that we're experiencing.
I was definitely more aware of it in a high school level thing.
I, as a parent, believe that if you're going to
you think there's no systemic racism?
I believe that it depends on how you define systemic racism. So if you're talking about regimens of racism, no. If you're talking about history has after effects, of course. So I think there's a
what the fuck? It's such a broad stroke statement.
Systemic racism. Sometimes what they mean by systemic racism is history has consequences. You can't have 150 years of 300 years of slavery followed by Jim Crow and then not have after effects, which of course is true. And sometimes what they mean is that every inequality in American public life is due to some systemic inequity that is currently taking place in the United States, which I think is absolutely.
I just realized he's wearing a yarmulke.
I mean, we certainly see that playing out in our criminal justice system. Are you going to deny that, or are you going to say that, let's say, African Americans or Latinos are just inherently more criminal? Or
I'm not going to say either of those things. I'm going to say that
so why are they overrepresented in our prisons?
There you go. There you go.
The scope of our conversation, but the answer is because not all groups commit crimes at the same level. That has nothing to do with genetics. That has everything to do with circumstances.
Could you guys hold those thoughts on education? Because I do want to get back to some of that too. But
Sure.
let me move on to something else we talked about.